first like got to know Susie mostly actually a bit after Occupy, when I was living with Lynn. That she was an active member of the media team back in Occupy, because she's very, very, very into citizens journalism. Just very like quite passionate about that. I didn't really actually understand it all to begin with, but then I started actually seeing kind of like the sort of like online following that she had, and some of the influence, or rather just the reach, like the reach that was quite clear. Like after also getting to know Susie a bit more better, and like spending time at her house and stuff, I remember noticing some of the kind of, I guess, like spooky things, you know. At that time of my life, I was going to pretty much most actions that had any sort of like progressive flair to them. Susie was also there at all those actions as well. Usually like, you know, like live streaming for Twitter, live tweeting, just sort of like documenting things, basically. Like a kind of like a sort of reminds me of like, I don't know, like historians and stuff throughout history, but I guess that's sort of like a part of the whole citizen journalism stuff, is kind of putting things onto paper, or as is now, you know, putting it online. One of the actions that Susie and I had attended was a Greenpeace thing. We went to Piha Beach. It was a very nice day. It was very nice. It was a very chill as so far as actions go. Initially, it was like, oh, this is great action, and then get back in the car, start heading back into town, and things got spooky. Like while driving, we got boxed in by these two Holdens. I was chatting away as I do. Susie says to me, look behind us. Look back, and I see the car. I see this dark late model Holden, and then I look up front, and then and she says, look, and look in front of us, and I look in front, and I'm seeing like kind of like the sort of proximity that's going on there, and the sort of kind of boxing thing that was happening there, and just like how I remember actually it feeling like a really kind of curious place to be, even being, you know, within the confines of a car and having that sort of metal cage around us. That sort of false sense of security that you get being in a car like that was kind of like a little bit just not there when you've got these vehicles doing this. I mean, I think maybe my first assumption was that it was like, you know, like an unmarked police vehicle, because it's similar models and stuff. Like why that was happening, you know, was it just like I don't know, like angry drivers trying to leave Piha in their V8 Holdens that they took to a climate protest? I just don't think someone who drives that kind of car would be going to an action like that, you know? I remember that being another thing that didn't add up about it as well. Because it was quite stressful, and I remember sort of just after kind of realizing, I wasn't talking much, and I sort of sat there and kind of, I think I did like breathing exercises just to kind of keep my cool a bit, and also sort of like, I don't know, be some sort of moral support to Susie. It's one of the times when I was at Susie's house. I'm not sure, I can't remember if we had her kids with us or not. But no, we were at the house, and I think we went out for like to get like lunch or dinner or something. You know, we locked the house up. I remember actually being really quite thorough about it as well, because Susie was very adamant about that, because she had already spoken a bit about sort of the kind of attention that she was getting in relation to like the journalism stuff and sort of the activism stuff, especially, you know, with what was happening during and after Occupy. But I remember locking up the house pretty thorough, and then when we got back, I think I can't remember if it was a window or a door or something was like left like just slightly kind of like opened and unlocked. And I think it was actually a door that I remember very specifically closing and locking. The door had been a door was slightly open, and things in the house were just like, so a few things were just slightly moved around a little bit, but it's like nothing was like really like rummaged through. There wasn't like a TV missing or like laptops gone or anything like that. It was just sort of like someone wandered into the house, fiddled with some stuff, and then left with the door slightly open just to be like, hey, I've been here, and being creepy, you know? I remember that thing happening and being like, damn, this is freaky, you know? I remember not really being able to imagine properly what that would have been like for Susie, to have to kind of like have that as like sort of, that's like your kind of daily life, your weekly life, you know? And I knew that it was happening that frequently because she would talk to me about it, you know? And it's just, I guess it's like when things like that happen as well, that are sort of like, you got the cars when they were boxing us in, and and I know this, I know I locked that door, and I know I closed it right. It's not like, it wasn't like a finicky door. It wasn't like, a broken ass door and like one of the rentals I've been in that doesn't close properly sometimes, and you got to like, jig it and stuff like that. It's just a regular old functional door that I locked and closed, and it wasn't locked and closed when we got back. Stressful stuff. Like I remember there was like, like some weird vehicles here and there and stuff. Like I think I do remember a few times we suspected that maybe we were being followed, just because it's like, the same kind of cars, doing the same old things. There was a time when we suspected that we were being followed, so we actually, I think we got off the motorway, did a random loop in a suburb, then got back on the motorway, and the car that we suspected was following us did that whole thing with us. It can become kind of normalized when this stuff is happening every day, but sort of it gets quite freaky, I guess, when there's sort of, I know when you're going on the windy roads and they're boxing you in, it's like this threatening nature of the harassment becomes quite I guess a bit more apparent in those situations, which I guess is the thing that I'm sort of like thinking about in particular when it comes to the situation of just not wanting to be in New Zealand or in any place that New Zealand has influence in, if that makes sense. We've got the Five Eyes, so clearly none of those places you'd be, you'd be free from harassment in, especially considering it seems like they're pretty determined. And then you have, where else? Any other countries that are basically in allegiance with those countries as well. So we're talking about, I guess, like, the global north or the west, or the sort of like the economic bloc that makes up, US and its allies and whatnot. I mean, I know a bunch of stories. I know some of the stuff that came out in the media is what's his name, who he was being paid by the police to basically just like relay information back to the police about activist stuff that was happening. There is other activists that I know that have been targeted by New Zealand surveillance unlawfully as well. An example of that would be some people that I knew who were involved with People Against Prisons Aotearoa. There was a prisoner who was being held in solitary confinement, in quotation marks, for their own safety, right? Because they kept getting like attacked and sexually assaulted in the general population. But anyways, they were being kept in solitary confinement, and which is a form of torture, as we know. And this person was becoming suicidal because they were pen pals with someone else on the outside, and we got whiffed of that. All the channels were used to try save this person from going nuts and very likely killing themselves. And so all that was left was some sort of protest action. There was unlawful surveillance of the activists. It was a thing that came out in the court, in the court during the court proceedings. They busted it out as evidence, as if that would stand up. But the trial and whatnot with these activists, it ended up getting what's the word? Just chucked out of court because it was a sham. But but yeah, that was one of the things that had come out, and that was a very solid and close to home and very, very tangible experience of activists being surveilled by the New Zealand government because of their involvement with activism. Susie's demeanor throughout, like I guess some of the time that we had spent together, and when she was still in New Zealand and stuff, and we're hanging out, generally quite kind of cool and collected, not gonna lie. Like considering like the stuff that I was quite aware of what was going on, still had things quite together and just quite strong-headed and very determined, which I think was actually one of the things I admired about Susie, was just sort of like in the face of this, in the face of like the state apparatus and all of the force it has and all the power that it has, still sort of just kind of like charging forward with what she believes to be right, and charging forward with engaging with her rights to like free expression and freedom of speech, freedom of press. It seemed like, yeah, it was very much a passionate thing. Like Susie was very passionate about media. Susie was very passionate about sort of challenging liars and nonsense when it was apparent that that's what was going on. When politicians were just talking out of their behinds. Obviously, there was like some anxieties and a bit of stress and stuff, but I think Susie sort of handled herself quite well. And a lot of the stuff was, I guess, kind of a new experience, because activists often get, have to deal with the state and have to deal with, like, I guess, dissent being repressed kind of like all the time. And it was, I guess, quite a new thing for Susie, especially to the level that it seemed to have been happening to her. Like, Susie wasn't ever like, she wasn't ever losing her shit, you know? Like, it was like, yes, there was like defensiveness and like anxieties and stuff, but it was like, there was still like a deliberateness to actions. Susie's been quite vocal about the things that have been happening to her, about the targeting and the harassment and stuff. Some of the things are like very quite obviously harassment. Some of the things could, I guess, be more easily shrugged off, but I guess when they're held in context with the things that I knew that was going on, yeah, there was things that I saw myself that I was seeing happen live. There's things that I definitely do believe. There's some things that I'm kind of like, I don't know. I guess it's possible, but for the most part, insofar as much as it goes, comes down to, was Susie harassed? Yes. When Susie talks about the fact that she was harassed, is it true? Absolutely. There's no way in how that wasn't happening. I saw it with my own eyes, you know, myself and even other people who, I guess, you know, looking from the outside to some degree. Of course, there's things that we can never know for sure. But I have no reason to doubt Susie. I don't think that there's much to gain from talking about how you're being screwed over, you know? Yes, I believe Susie. Why? Because I've seen some of the things, and I know that the New Zealand government and other states, this is what they do. They want to enforce the status quo. They want to retain the status quo. At every moment in history, when we see protests and actions, we see the state on one side protecting the status quo, and and repressed populations on the other side saying the status quo isn't good enough, the status quo is bad. You know, when these people were protesting and taking action and, you know, doing what you do with democracy, you had them being repressed by the state. You know, you have the status quo on one side, which is the state and everything they uphold, you know, class society, capitalism, the property relations that retain the way in which the economics within society function, you know, how people in their class positions interact with each other. Like, I know what states do, and this is what they do. When someone is not towing the line, they get repressed. It's as simple as it gets. It doesn't matter if, you know, you're in the United States, if you're in China, if you're in the UK, if you're in Russia, if you're in Iceland, or if you're, it doesn't matter where you are. When there's a state there and it has a status quo to uphold and someone is going up against that status quo, they won't like it. And they will generally do something about it. When dissent is being repressed, it benefits power. The work that Susie was doing, yeah, I don't recall actually really anyone else actually really doing. Like, there was sort of, I guess, people that were involved in particular movements that were sort of doing it just within that movement, or, you know, single issue, or, you know, like group, you know, like if it's like, say, like a socialist group or something, or an organization, there'd be people that would be doing sort of media stuff there. But sort of, I guess, the sort of more broader approach, and the uplifting of voices, as well as the sort of the support from like other organizations. There was a whole bunch of different issues that Susie was involved in and did media stuff around a bunch of those issues. Susie also had a platform that made those issues and the people involved in them and their voices heard much more. Not just because of like individual follower accounts, but because of like endorsements, I guess, and like boosting from like big, much, very like well-known organizations such as WikiLeaks. And I didn't really see anyone else doing those things. There was people who are sticking to, I guess, their camps, you know, and doing stuff within those things. But it was actually kind of unique. And I don't know if it's possible to really to know for sure, or to even gauge exactly what that really means. Like, I think journalism is incredibly important, especially for informing people of things. You know, like I think that there's definitely a new light that New Zealand was shown under to a whole bunch of people all around the world because of Susie's work. It's something you can't quantify, you know? And it's like, in that sense, then it's kind of like, this is incredibly important then. I mean, when I think about that, I think about how that kind of relates to perhaps why Susie was being targeted so much with all of that spooky stuff, you know? If somebody asked me, is Susie safe to come back to New Zealand? I'd say no. Um, Especially if, you know, Susie's wanting to have any sort of like normal-ish kind of life, you know, a life that's like free of harassment, you know, not having your house busted into, or um, uh, cars following you around and stuff. Like it's not a really nice way to live, you know. You have to constantly watching over your shoulder and stuff, not sure if like at any point, you know, will the surveillance, will the harassment and stuff escalate? You know, being free of those things altogether is really important. I don't think that there was any solution to the problems that Susie was facing in New Zealand. It's pretty obvious that the state was invested in harassing her. We see it all the time when police do misconduct. You go to the quote, independent unquote, police conduct authority. And what do? They say, the police did nothing wrong. You know, it's like going to a schoolyard bully and saying, hey, you've been bullying me lots. Um, I'd like to lodge a formal complaint to you about your bullying of me. You know, if you're being picked on by a sovereign nation and you're within the borders of that nation, there is no way to stop that nation from harassing you while you're still there, because you are within their territory. You are within the lines from which they draw, where they say, we control everything here. We decide everything that goes down here. We have a military, we have police, we have courts, we have jails. In any country, if you're in a country and that country's state is picking on you, there is no there's no way in which you can get that dealt with if it is literally the state that is picking on you. I'm just trying to think, like, is there any is Susie going to overthrow that government and stop it from harassing her? No, she's one person. She went to the police and tried to lay a complaint, and they just fobbed her off, to say the least, which is pretty typical of them. When the police are doing a naughty thing and you don't like it, I mean, they don't have to care about it. Like, insofar as much as police being accountable to the general population of New Zealand, I don't think they're all that accountable. I think they have media and you know, smoke and mirrors on their side. They have a cape on, you know, they're the heroes or whatever. And so if the hero is being naughty and doing bad things, you're going to have a whole bunch of people who admire them against you, not just, you know, the state itself as well. I want to see Susie safe, um, and empowered to continue what she's been doing this whole time. I want to see Susie in a situation where she's comfortable enough um, to continue with citizens journalism, to have a safe place where she can be with her kids and have a, you know, relatively normal life, as well as, um, you know, as anybody else, you know, does, you know, develop as a person, get to, you know, like, with, you know, not having to worry about people busting into your house. You know, like, it's going to take a lot of like mental energy from somebody, you know, and there's going to be a lot of sort of like, I don't know, like things that people do with like that kind of loss of energy because of being worried about those things and having to deal with those things. It stops people from doing it, be able to do all kinds of things. And I think it's horrible that happens to Susie. I think it's horrible that it happens to anybody.